droid. But a lot of what we do is partnering up with the 501st at events. And we have two different modes, if you will, when we do events. Like this event would be where we're costumers, you know, just like we're all droid builders here. So you get to see behind the magic. But there's a lot of events where we're actually characters. We try not to let people know that, you know, we're a person inside. We are a stormtrooper. We are Darth Vader. Or in the case of R2 or Chopper, they are R2 or Chopper. So as a droid operator, I didn't want to make it apparent that I was controlling the droids in any way, shape, or form. They're real. This is R2-D2. But throughout the time, R2's been tinkered with a lot. I don't think there is a single piece of electronics or wiring in him that was original. His motors have been ripped out. He started with 100-watt brushed motors. We went to 150 so he could drive on carpet. He did okay at droid races at Celebration Orlando. But when we got closer to Celebration Chicago, my son said he wanted to be more competitive. So what do? You have to design a completely new motor mount. And we went brushless motors with Neo, and he ended up winning droid races at Celebration Chicago. The dome light systems have been revamped. He started with TCs. He's got R series. I think we've probably gone through 2 or 3 different sets of PSIs, but I've settled right now on the Max Stang PSI Pros. Hollow projectors, I had animated in lights for a while. That's a project that there were lessons learned. Kids thought they were dials, and all of my wiring became rat's nest shorted, and I had to go back to the design board, and that's a tabled project I need to come back to. But the one we're here to hear about is the control system. So at the time I got R2, there were 3 basic approaches that I could find on the forums that people were using to control things. RC systems, which are still very popular today. Arguably, they're the most reliable system. And with things like Kyber, they're now very extensible, and you can get all sorts of different controls. We started with a system called Padawan that used PlayStation 2 controls, and you could control fairly well with that. It wasn't too big. You could kind of conceal it behind your back and drive your droid. And then there was also builder Chris had created the Stealth system, which fit in the palm of your hand. It was almost indistinguishable in a crowd. And that had me really intrigued because I wanted to not be seen. So I started looking into that. Unfortunate for me, it was very closed system. I had a specific sound system in my droid already. I had some other things. I didn't want to change out and match the rest of his control system just to adopt his remotes. And I wanted something that, as my R2 evolved, I could get into the source code. I could monkey, I could make changes, and I could make it my own. So I developed Shadow, and that used PlayStation 3 Move navigation controllers. So I can use 1 or I can use 2, depending on the situation. And you know, with a single controller, you can take drive R2, you can move his dome. If I wanted to do something like move a hollow projector, that was offloaded to the secondary remote. And high level, the hardware that was involved or is involved in that, there's an Arduino Mega board, a USB host shield, a USB dongle, and then the rest of this was standard things that really was legacy coming from that Padawan, and they were just very common components in R2s at that point. A saber tooth to drive your foot motors, siren motor controller for your dome, and an MP3 trigger for sounds. So that's been supported, dare I say, for 10 years now in Shadow, and it's been stable, and there's a number of builders using it. In the last roughly 2 years, it's gotten hard to build it with off-the-shelf parts ordered just from Amazon. This is the host shield board. And this chip here, they've started doing a replacement chip that is not fully compliant. So you can get them fairly easily, but you have to order a corrected board from Tinkersphere, or you can take your chances on Amazon, and you're probably going to have to replace that chip. But the correct chip's pretty easy to get. I do have a, I'll say, defective board and a chip here, so if anyone wants to see how to do that replacement, sometime in the next day or two, I'll go into the soldering room and actually do one of those. So just find me after the presentation and we'll find a time to do a demo. But what a lot of people don't realize is Shadow does have support for a lot of different hardware. Sound systems, it supports a number of different things. My Droid has a CF Sound 3 system, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. MP3 trigger is probably the most common one. The Rogue RMP3, probably my mouse droid, is the only droid that runs it. I really like that one because when you're sending the commands to its API, you can send a specific file name. So it became really easy to program if you wanted an extensive library of sounds. DF Player, very inexpensive board. And most recently, I've been playing with the OpenSmart Serial MP3. I can get them off AliExpress for less than $5. They have a direct connection for a speaker. So if you're just dealing with a test rig, you can connect it to your laptop, you can play with it, and you can see what it is without your amp and everything. And Chopper's actually been running one of those for about a year now. Now, motor control is where we also have expanded recently with Shadow. So for a while, he's had the brushless or brushed motors, so your classic scooter motors. About 2019, just before Celebration, we added PWM support so we could run Neo motors. And there's a few users out there that are running Neo brushless motors with Shadow. The advantage of a brushless motor is it's much more efficient in terms of power, and you get more power. R2, if I was on a carpeted floor like this running for a day, if I was doing a lot of driving, I might have to swap my batteries after 3 hours. Brush motors, even on the carpet, he'll go all day with driving, and same set of batteries is still good. And not draining the batteries much also gives me longer life on the SLA batteries because I'll get more recharge cycles out of it. We've took, and Chris Edwards at one point had ported Shadow, so there was a Shadow MSE version. I've actually taken that drive system, and now it has been backported into the main branch, so you can just configure which drive you want, and that'll drive a mouse droid that has your traditional servo steering and power. And the other thing that's in process of testing right now is adding a Mecanum drive for scrubber droids. So that'll be able to do not only your forward, back, rotate left, rotate right, but also strafing sideways. So sound is the other thing. A lot of people who were using the original Padawan that had 8 sound banks where it could either trigger a specific sound or a bank of sounds, like maybe an R2 whistle. With Shadow, the people who are using MP3 triggers kind of kept with that. By using the D-pad, you had 4 buttons. You could use your L1 or L2 as a trigger. That would give you 8 more. And then some were using the X and O to also trigger sounds, so they could get about 16 sounds. I had the CF Sound system, which interestingly had a basic interpreter built into the sound system. So I had written a whole bunch of extended code there where I could take and send it a sequence of things, and then it would run the appropriate sound. So for instance, if I wanted R2 to, if he ran into a Dalek, he might have something to say. Or maybe if he runs into ghosts and the Ghostbusters come calling. So it's handy to be able to take and just, depending on the environment, and especially at a con, interact beyond just the normal beeps and whistles that R2 do. It gives him an extended personality. The problem at the time was that was offloaded code. So in recent restructuring of the code, all of that functionality has been brought down into the main sketch, so that can be utilized now with other sound cards like the MP3 trigger. And talking with builders over the last year or little more, a lot of people wanted more functionality beyond that, and there's been some things with Chopper I wanted to tackle where people are using Maestros and other serial-based boards. So rather than having the code treat those structures as sound first, we've restructured it as kind of D-pad sequence commands, and then those can trigger anything. So if you want a sequence to trigger a sound, that's great. But if you want that to go and send a Maestro serial command and trigger that script, you can do that instead. And from a coding perspective, we've also restructured to make that easier. The original Shadow code was one long Arduino ini file. And it was very functional, but a lot of people who are coming into the R2 community want to be able to customize it, and they're not software developers. There are some that are. Mirmir does an awesome job. He developed Real 2 and stuff, but everything is out in libraries. And if you're not familiar with how to go and look at Arduino libraries, it can be overwhelming if all you're trying to do is make a simple change. So what we've done is I've restructured it into a collection of different INO files that will compile together. But there's a configuration file that has the main things, and then there's separate files for drive. So like if you have a Sabertooth drive, that's all in one file. If you're a mouse droid, all of the drive for the mouse droid is in one single file. And the hope there is that it'll take smaller domain set. You're only going to be looking at, maybe 100 lines of code. It'll make it easier for intro builders to get in, modify the code. And in the case where most builders are trying to modify it, it's, hi, I want to be able to send a different command. So all of the D-pad commands are in one file. It's basically just a list of all the sequences, and you can just call out to a different output. Hardware-wise, Arduino Mega is where Shadow's been running for over 10 years. Over time, I have adopted the Key Studio board as my preferred board for my droids, and the real reason for that is it has the 12-volt input, and it has 5-volt, 2-amp voltage converter built on board. So if you are connecting servos or things, you have enough juice to actually do things like move your utility arms without needing additional converters, and it's got those servo pinouts right on the board. You can do it with other things. It's just that's been an all-in-one solution. It's got a nice USB-C plug, so it connects to modern hardware, and most people have a USB-C cable handy. The other board that people are starting to run Shadow on and is the Penumbra board that Mirmir put together. That's ESP2 based, and it has a host bridge, so that's another option. Shadow MD fork is running on it currently, and I'm working on getting the main fork to support that. And then also you can kind of roll your own, so you can do just your own ESP32 and the mini USB host bridge, and that is a functional option as well. So I guess for there, I will pause and say, what sort of questions do people have?
Hang on, I gotta.
Oh, we have a microphone. Cool.
Thank you. For somebody that's coming from or has come from the Padawan 360, who's already using the Mega 80K, you still thinking the Key Studio that you like? And how hard is it then to just buy the other components and use that instead of the Padawan 360?
So right now, if you've got Padawan 360, you've already got a host bridge, right? Because you're USB. So if you're comfortable with the board you have for the Mega and your host bridge already works, it's all of getting a USB dongle, plugging it in, and then finding some of the remotes. Everything else would just be changing the software. So, and for those that don't know, historically I mentioned Padawan 360, and then about the same time I was developing Shadow, there was a separate initiative that took the Padawan code and updated it from PlayStation 2 controllers to Xbox 360 controllers. So they were kind of parallel efforts, and we did a lot of comparing of notes back at the time.
Anybody else have a question? Where are you using the new software?
The new versions will be up on GitHub. Currently, it's living mostly on my 2 laptops as I've been in testing mode, but I was hoping to have it all ready and debuted before DroidCon, and the code is functional. I just haven't gotten around to committing it yet. So probably within the week, I'll have that up in the Shadow GitHub repository.
For the Penumbra, when are you going to support that with the new code?
As soon as I can run some tests. It's supposed to be as simple as me updating some pins and validating. So the Penumbra board should be functional soon. We'll see how this weekend goes. I don't know. There may be some downtime. I've got a spare Penumbra board and one of my test kits here, so I can do some testing. So.
You would think after all these years I would know some of this stuff, but someone who doesn't know electronics that well, how easy is this? Is it to just download the software onto the boards? Is this more like a plug and play, or do we need to do some programming for it, or how does this work?
So far as ease, I would say it's probably not quite as easy as getting RC up and running, because that's just going to be plug in your wires. There is at least one configuration file. You will need to do some settings so that you can determine what is the drive system you want, right? Are you running a Sabertooth? Are you running PWM based? Is it for a mouse droid? What's your sound system? If you're not doing anything special beyond that, you can just, in the configuration file, set those few settings, flash that image to the Arduino board. That may be a learning curve for some, but there's many of us in the room that'll help people learn how to write software to an Arduino. And then the other thing would be building your sound card so that you have the sounds you want in the right locations on that sound card, so that when you press a button, you're getting the sound you want. So it all depends on how much customization you want, right?
Any other questions?
So one other question I did hear this weekend was, what controllers does it support? So I primarily use the Move Navigation controller. It does work with PlayStation 3 DualShock controllers. So if you do prefer the 2 sticks for whatever reason, you can use those. Other controllers could be supported with code changes, but it is not supporting others out of the box. So.
I ran into problems a couple weeks ago with those controllers. They're not easy to find anymore. So if you get them and buy a lot of them.
I would agree. They have gotten harder to find now that PlayStation 5 has come out. GameStops and things are not carrying them. For a while after I'd come out with the system, I would just, whenever I was out, I would raid GameStops, and you could find them for like $2 a piece at one point later. But they are out there. I've talked to some builders that have found them for about $10 to $15 recently, but you may have to hunt a little bit. The biggest problem with used ones is the batteries. They can be replaced fairly easily, so the batteries are an easy upgrade if you get a controller that has a bad one. The other thing to note is PlayStation, in their infinite wisdom, has a handshake in the charger. You cannot plug this into a standard wall plug and charge your controller. Any Windows machine can charge it, or an official or bootleg charger that's designed for PlayStation 3. But I have heard if you plug it into your actual PlayStation 3, it will pair it to your PlayStation 3, and then you will have to pair it back to your Droid. So finding a specific, yeah, get both the charger and a controller would be my advice.
Do you have the, will you be working with the other gentleman that's doing the RC version of it?
I was going to say, I
The
know
little hand controller?
Lord Hotwing was doing that. He and I haven't talked much lately to see where he was deviating, but happy to talk with John and see what collaboration makes sense there. I was going to say, I don't see him in the room right now. Yeah.
How do you compensate for stick drift?
So how do I compensate for stick drift? At the moment, I will say I've been lucky enough. I haven't had much trouble with that. That is a active discussion between me and another builder right now. So we are optimizing some of that so we can account for it better. He has a very light, powerful droid system right now, and he's been testing, and he is getting some drift with the PWM based. I haven't seen that at all with a full weighted droid yet, but it probably depends on your specific setup. So if somebody has a droid experiencing that, let me know, and I can work with them. The saber tooth, you can actually control some of that right within the saber tooth, and it's mixing. So, yep, another question.
Did you run into a problem where they were requiring you to do the RC controller versus the PlayStation? They want an actual, not Bluetooth, safety reasons or whatever?
I have not encountered that. I have heard in the UK that they have some regulations in their droid building community around that. Like I've said, R2 has been at over 630 events. We haven't had issues with it, although there are some events like when we go to Fan Expo in Toronto, and there is just a ton of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, range can start diminishing, right? There's some places where I go and I have easily 75 foot plus of range with no issues. There was one time I went up there and I was near the Intel booth. I was probably down to about 5 foot to get reliable control. The plus side with how Shadow's coded, if it's not getting the signal it expects, it is full stop on all motors. So R2 just stops moving his head, stops moving his feet, and waits for you to get closer so you can let him know what to do. So, any other
I
questions?
don't think we have any other questions.
All right.
All righty. Well, thank you all very much.